And there was a time early on where negativity was killing me. Every Monday, especially, right? When Sunday didn't go the way you thought it should, not as many people came up. You just have this negativity. He says, I want you to start to do something about it. And one of the biggest things was to put a little journal. It was a red journal by my bed. And at night, I would write down 10 things from that day that I was thankful for. And I would then write things from Philippians that were beautiful and praiseworthy and excellent, and just name those things about that day so that I could begin to shift my focus to all that God was doing instead of what I thought he owed me or what I deserved or what I thought he should do. And I mean, there was one time I was whining to him in the middle of a service. That's how bad it got for it, right? Like I'm in the middle of worship and I'm whining, God, where are the people, right? And he has a way of kind of putting us into our place. And that first chapter is a little direct. And then as you read, it gets a little softer and helpful, right? But it kind of gets your attention. And God did that for me that day. It's like, God, where are the people? I'm preaching to an empty room. What is the point of this? And he just said, son, you're not that good. Be thankful anyone showed up, right? Love them, serve them, teach them. Let me take care of the empty seats. And you love the ones with people in them, right? Like, love those people, serve those people, teach those people. Let me deal with that.
Marcus Aurelius said, what we do in life echoes through eternity. What is your life echoing through eternity? Welcome to Echoes Through Eternity with Dr. Jeffrey Skinner. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and encourage leaders from across the globe to plant missional churches and be servant leaders. So join us and hear the stories of servant leaders reverberating lives as God echoes them through eternity. Brought to you by Missional Church Planting and Leadership Development and Dynamic Church Planting International.
Welcome into Echoes Through Eternity. I am your host, Dr. Jeffrey D. Skinner. I am joined what is God echoing through your life today? I'm joined in the studio today by Timothy Fox. Are you a doctor, Tim? Have you got your doctorate? So Dr. Timothy Fox, he is the District Superintendent of the South Coastal Wesleyan Church district here in Georgia. What is that? Georgia is South Carolina. The Carolinas included in that? Mississippi. Okay. So Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. And so anyway, good to have him here today. He has written a book that I have been reading, and it is entitled Rethinking Church, Leading the Struggling Church Through Death to New Life. I love the title. As I've gone through it, began to go through it, I have not finished it, in all honesty, but I was hooked from the first words, and just the title of it was interesting to me, just because you guys know that Desmond and I have written a book, Revitalized to Plant, Reshaping the Established Church to Plant Churches, and we use that resurrection metaphor, and that's the thing that Tim talks about. And not only does he talk about it, he's done it. He had the courage to close a church. He tried to lead a revitalization effort. It failed. I say it failed. It failed temporarily. There is no failure in the kingdom of God, really, because God uses everything, doesn't waste anything. Yep. But he ended up, as a result of all that, God pushed back about 6 months into it and had to retool and had to rethink it. And so out of that grew this book. And out of this book, he became the DS of the South Coastal District here. He was up in North Carolina leading well, had his Hydrant Church, and I'll let him tell you all about what that metaphor is about. It is just so good to meet a like-minded leader in the church today, and one at such a high capacity, someone that has the ability to lead churches like 12 Stone that minister to upwards of 17,000 people a week at all campuses and online and everywhere, but can also relate to the small church, the struggling church, the one who may be facing death, is wondering, whether or not they can pay the budgets or whether they can even pay for a new roof. So welcome, Tim. Great to have you, brother.
Yeah, it's great to be with you today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good. So tell us a little bit. I told him that you are the District Superintendent for South Coastal Wesleyan District, Church of the Nazarene. Tell us a little bit about your story. You said you grew up in a church of the Nazarene. I did not know that before we talked today. Tell us a little bit about your story, though.
Yeah. So long history in the Church of the Nazarene, family of church planters. The oldest ordination certificate I have here in the office from the Church of the Nazarenes from the 1920s.
Wow.
Great grandmother. And so it's a great legacy of ministry in the holiness tradition and the Wesleyan family, and served in Nazarene churches in Tennessee and in West Virginia. And Virginia had great opportunities there and served in different places, done a little bit of everything from kids ministry to design and sports and middle school and revitalization and different things like that. And in 2012, we were led to Goldsboro, North Carolina, which is about an hour east of Raleigh in the middle of nowhere. And a military town, a great little community where we were kind of challenged to revitalize the church. They'd been through lots of challenges in the last couple of years. And like you said, realized that wasn't going to be how God worked in that particular place. And we walked through this path starting in 2013 of closing the church and relaunching. It's a brand new church, new philosophy of ministry, new leadership, new board, and new name, all those kinds of things. And just saw God do some remarkable things over the next 5 to 10 years. Really excited. They'll actually in 2023 celebrate 10 years since the relaunch, and will be launching their first church plant out of Hydrant on that anniversary. So they're doing a great job there, and it was a privilege to lead through that process. And then in 2021, we were elected to the DS position in the South Coastal District of the Wesleyan Church. So I serve churches in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. We have the largest church in the denomination and some of the smallest, and lots of normal churches all in between there. And it's a great privilege to serve those men and women and to do our best to resource the kingdom in all of those little locations across that territory.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about, I told you earlier, I've never heard of another church, heard of lots of cross connection churches, cross point churches, and all kinds of cross churches, but never a fire hydrant church or hydrant church. I read your book where that vision came about. Tell us a little bit about that and what that hydrant means.
Yeah, I was actually sitting in a business meeting, which I don't usually do real well in. Not my favorite kind of environment.
And yet
Mine was
DS.
drifting. Yeah. We had to change up how we do meetings, right? Yeah, God has a sense of humor. So my mind was drifting, and I remember I took out my name tags. I didn't have anything to write on, and borrowed a pen and wrote the word hydrant on the back, and went back and began to dream and imagine what it would look like for a church to be like a fire hydrant, to be that point of life-giving water, life-saving water. Every community, every neighborhood needs a hydrant. You can't have one big one for the whole town. It would have too much pressure. So you need these little life-giving places that are used to save families, to save homes, to save lives, save marriages through the life-giving water, the grace of God himself. And so we saw ourselves just simply as the valve of God's living water to make a difference in the community around us. And so that image stuck. It really began to connect for people. And the language of connecting and filling and overflowing came together around that as how we lived out our calling as a church, helping people to connect to God and one another, their lives to be filled with grace and truth as they poured that into others and overflowed in service to the community and in the mission of the church.
Yeah, that's good. So one of the things, reading your book, your personality seems to kind of bleed through there. And one of the things that caught me is I coach people in planting and some in revitalization, although my specialty admittedly is not revitalization. Desmond Barrett, the co-author of the book that we wrote, he's more revitalization. I don't do well in established church circles. I tried that for a couple of years, and I will admit that I was a huge failure at the established church. And God revealed to me that my call is certainly planting and replanting churches. But anyway, one of the things that you said is that let me see if I can find the quote here. But you're talking about whining. You know, it just said that we as leaders, we sit around and whine a lot and blame our people because the church is not growing. We blame the community. We blame the world. We blame culture. It's just not a safe place for our kids anymore. And then you kind of get to the point you say, as long as we're whining, we aren't working. What if as leaders, we simply decide to stop whining? When we start the pity party, we lose sight of what is real and what is possible. When we whine, we stop communicating with God and start talking at him as if God doesn't know what he's doing. When we grumble, we separate ourselves from the people we serve. From the people we serve with blame, bitterness, and disappointment. Whining gets us nowhere. We fall further and further behind. So let's agree to stop whining and start listening to what God might be saying to us. I love that, because, hey, look, I've whined with the best of them, brother. I have. I sat around and blamed everybody but me, and had those come to Jesus moments where Jesus said, look at everything I went through. You didn't see me whining. I just, suck it up, buttercup, and get out there and get to work, and create culture instead of whining about culture. Christian leaders everywhere are talking about Revitalize to Plant. Written by Drs. Desmond Barrett and Jeffrey D. Skinner, Revitalize to Plant is more than a philosophical approach to church planting and revitalization. The authors have experienced the crucible of leading in the trenches of ministry. It's gritty, practical, and most of all, recasts our vision and understanding of church planting and revitalization. Revitalize to Plant, now available on Amazon or revitalizetoplant.com. That's revitalizetoplant.com, the last resource you'll need to bring new life to your church. So talk to us about your kind of come to Jesus meeting, where you found that in your own call there.
Yeah, I am an epically good whiner. I can find all kinds of reasons to be frustrated and disappointed. And part of that comes out of a positive thing of being able to look into the future and imagine what could be, which then causes me to look at now and say, why aren't we there now, and get frustrated. And so what I realized and what God kind of helped me understand is when I'm doing that, I fail to enjoy the gift of right now and the beautiful things that are happening right now. And so now I'm no longer operating from a place of gratitude. I'm operating from a place of entitlement with God, which is never a good place to be. And then I look at the people and I start to blame them and think that it's their fault that we're not getting wherever I think we're supposed to be. And it really begins to separate you from God, separate you from others and from those around us. And at times it sneaks in, right? We don't even realize that tendency. So there was a period, every now and again, God takes me back to the fruit of the Spirit. And he's like, and he says, just pray through this for me for a little bit. And as I pray through, he usually raises one of those components up and says, hey, I need you to work on this right now. And there was a time early on where negativity was killing me every Monday, especially, right? When Sunday didn't go the way you thought it should, not as many people came up. You just have this negativity. He says, I want you to start to do something about it. And one of the biggest things was to put a little journal. It was a red journal by my bed. And at night, I would write down 10 things from that day that I was thankful for. And I would then write things that from Philippians that were beautiful and praiseworthy and excellent, and just name those things about that day so that I could begin to shift my focus to all that God was doing instead of what I thought he owed me or what I deserved or what I thought he should do. And I mean, there was one time I was whining to him in the middle of a service. That's how bad it got for you, right? Like I'm in the middle of worship and I'm whining, God, where are the people? Right. And he has a way of kind of putting us into our place. And that first chapter is a little direct. And then as you read, it gets a little softer and helpful, right? But it kind of gets your attention. And God did that for me that day. It's like, God, where are the people? I'm preaching to an empty room. What is the point of this? And he just said, son, you're not that good. Be thankful anyone showed up, right? Love them, serve them, teach them. Let me take care of the empty seats, and you love the ones with people in them, right? Like love those people, serve those people, teach those people. Let me deal with that. Yeah. If you take care of what I've entrusted to you, then I can add more. But until you're doing that well, there's no reason for me to send anybody else here. So he has this way of kind of putting us in our place and getting us back into the right perspective and direction.
Yeah,
he certainly has done that more than once for me.
That's good. So further in the chapter, you talk about getting unstuck, and I was surprised at some of the things that we don't think of. I should say we should not be surprised that pain and anger, and failure could stick us, but you list triumph, luck, success as moments that potentially get us stuck. Talk a little bit about those, how success and triumph and luck, even depending on your view of life, as you say, can become a place that we get stuck.
Well, I think when we have had success in the past, we think that we'll always have success.
Yeah.
Or a triumph, we want to do it just that way again. And God doesn't seem to work in the exact same way twice very often. And so if we get stuck in the success of, the 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, we'll stop imagining what he's asking us to do next. And we'll keep trying to repeat what he did in the past on our own efforts. Though he's moved on, we're still stuck in that success or that triumph or that victory or that reputation, or trying to hold on. And that's where I think a lot of churches, they can remember the good old days, whatever those were, the 50s, the 60s, the 80s, the 2000s, whatever the good old days were for them, whatever season they felt like they were most actively fulfilling the life of the church. And they want to go back to that instead of moving forward to something new. And God is always about doing something new. He's always about new life. He's always about moving us forward. And we kind of have to take Paul's words and, forgetting what's behind, press on toward what's ahead. And I think success, it may be even more tempting to get stuck in success than failure, because it brings in pride as well.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it reminds me, John Maxwell talks a lot about putting your trophies on the shelf and getting back to work, and and that's true. I mean, we do tend to, especially in the church, we tend to live in that past. We keep praying for God to send a revival. And we have to remind ourselves that revival may not look in this generation the way it looked in previous generations.
Absolutely.
And we saw, some call it a revival, some call it an outpouring, whatever you want to call it, was happening at Asbury up there. But it was a move of God, whatever it was, but it didn't look exactly like. It wasn't led by a great preacher. It wasn't led by some Christian music group. It just began with a handful of people, students, who just kind of wanted to bask in the Spirit of God, and just kind of in His presence. And other people were attracted to that. And I have said for so long, instead of the church being attractional, and that's one of the things I love about 12 Stone and what Pastor Kevin's doing over there with handing the baton to Jason, is they're being very intentional with their Daymaker series and everything about allowing the people to become the ministers, the priesthood of the believers, so to speak, where they become the attraction, the lives that we are living, the way we react to failure, the way we respond when we get that cancer diagnosis or whenever we fail, whatever it may be in life, it throws our way. Instead of being Don Quixote and jousting at the windmill, we respond in a different way. We just say, well, though he slay me, I will serve him, in the words of Job, right? But one of the things you talk about in your book as you begin to move beyond, you move at the end of the chapter, you move more into hope. You say, is your church small? Most are. Does your church struggle financially? Most do. Do you need more volunteers and leaders? Of course you do. Is the church inwardly focused? Plenty of them are. Is your church stuck? Most are. Is your church dying? Many are. Are the odds stacked against you? Join the club. You have some empathy there. It's like, okay, you're not alone in this. We're all in this boat together. So let's start bailing the water out of the ship instead of sinking, instead of worrying about sinking. Let's get to work, right? So you talk about the soil and the culture of the church there. And that is so important. And so you mentioned Chip and Dan Heath in there with authors, and wrote a book, Switch, I think is what the book is, talking about changing when change is hard. I believe that's the name of the book, but I don't know if that's the direct one you quote or not, but that's one of their books. Yep. Anyway, you just talk about that culture and how you shape culture. And so a lot of times we'll lament the soil that we have, but as the leader of that church, we're responsible for cultivating that soil, right? So talk a little bit about the soil there for the church.
Yeah, soil, the culture trumps everything. Your vision, your ministries, your activities, your talent, your opportunity, it trumps everything. You can plant the best seed, the word of God, like the best seed in bad soil, and it's not going to take root. You can bring in the best staff, you can put in the most innovative ministries, and it's not going to make a difference if the soil's bad, if the culture of the church is bad. The things that happen beneath everything. And the easiest way to kind of understand the culture is to think about why and how you do everything. They're kind of the why and how you do everything you do as a church. And once you begin to address those kind of core beliefs and values that are shaping what you do. So sometimes the easiest example, and I can't remember if I used it in the book or not, but the easiest example for me is when a pastor wants to remove the pulpit from the church and wants to use a table. And usually the pastor wants to do this. Their communication style is more connected instead of teaching, and they want to be able to engage more effectively to effectively communicate the scriptures to the people in the church. But what we fail to think, we see this pulpit, the outward behavior, and we think, okay, it'll be easy. I'll just move it. But we don't realize the pulpit is attached to a value about preaching and scripture at the center of our worship, which is attached to a belief on the primacy and the authority of scripture. And if we don't address why that pulpit's there and how we still value the same thing and believe the same thing, though we're doing it a different way, you'll never get that pulpit out of there without a fight. It'll be a constant fight. And that's just one little example, but the way that we treat people, the way that we respond to change, of what we do when money's tight, all of those come out of the culture. And to shift your culture from really an unhealthy, rocky, weedy soil into something that is healthy and can be growing, it just takes time and leadership and intentionality. It takes teaching what we believe at the core. It takes identifying and naming together the values that you're going to begin to embed, answering the question, what is God calling our church to do? And then determining how you're going to do it and putting it into practice over time. Like that, we can list out these 5 things and these 5 steps, but the truth is it's going to take most of us. It takes a really good leader 5 years to change a culture.
Yeah.
It takes an average leader closer to 7, the exceptional leader in that 3-year mark. So the fact is, we just need to be ready to invest some time and help a church get healthy again beneath the surface, so that when people do come in, they can meet the Christ in that environment and it not be pulled out or it not be scorched by the sun or trampled on in the past. Yeah. So I think that's for me, that was such a key thing as we began to do the work, that we're like, how do we keep coming back to these same bad behaviors and attitudes that were there before? It's because we hadn't addressed them and gone back beneath the surface. So it wouldn't matter how good your music is, your preaching is, those things, culture will kill it.
Yeah. So we talked about you closing that church down in order to relaunch as Hydrant. So what did you do? Was it 5 weeks you were closed? What did you do during those 5 weeks to address that culture shift?
Not 5 weeks, first off, was not nearly long enough. And there were, like, I jokingly tell people when I give them the book or we start to read it together or something, it's like, this is all the ways I got it wrong and what I learned from it, right? Like, that's all this is. It's just a list of my failures and the lessons. So we did it. We were closed too short. We didn't get enough outside support and didn't have enough time to make sure we had the leadership and some of these key things in place and then communicate outward. So we worked on that stuff, but 5 weeks just isn't long enough. And so what we had to do, it started long before the 5 weeks, casting the vision for closing down and relaunching as a new church. No guarantees this will work, but it's modeled in the life of Jesus, laying down our lives, right? He's like, those who lose their life, find it, especially those who lose it for the kingdom, for the gospel. right? Like we find new life. There's something possible if we're willing to do this. If not, we can continue down this path for a long time. And I said something way back then I probably wouldn't say now, right? Like in your years, but it was the way I was feeling in the moment. It's like, if we're not willing to go after people and that God loves, we might as well just put on the sign, go to hell. We don't care. Because that's how we're acting as a church, right?
Right.
So probably a little too direct for a sermon, right?
Right.
But we kind of recognized, man, we've got to do something radical. So we spent those 5 weeks investing in a new way of thinking, a new focus for everything we do. And we started teaching it. But to be honest, it took another 18 months before it took root. And really, there were some things that had to change in me that took root during that time as well. And so we closed and restarted, but our momentum came about 18 months later when we saw God just pour out his blessing and honor the things that we had done over that 18 months. Which one of the biggest was to shift into a team ministry model. I spent 12 months. All I did other than preaching and praying is we didn't create new ministries, not a ton of outreach. I spent time developing volunteer teams and developing leaders for a year, getting the infrastructure set so we could minister to twice as many people. But so that was one of those things. It just took a long time, but it started, here are our core beliefs. Here's what we're going to go after. Here's our priorities. And so now what's got to happen over the next 18 months is everything has to come into alignment with those. But we began teaching them and then jumped in. Probably should have taken 3 to 6 months closed.
Do you want to grow and multiply your church? Perhaps you need help launching a new church or even a Christian ministry like a coffee shop or something else. Do you find yourself struggling just to recruit volunteers week after week? Is your church in need of new life? Maybe you're fresh out of seminary and the organizational leadership called you with an opportunity and you realize that opportunity needs a fresh start. Or perhaps you're a church planter. You've been going it alone for a while now and you're exhausted, lonely, and doubting your call. We understand. Church planting, launching a new church is hard. Missional Leadership Coaching is here to help. Go to missionalleadershipcoaching.com and click on our free offer to get started today. That's missionalleadershipcoaching.com. We look forward to helping you.
Yeah, I heard you say it took, 12 months to really gain your momentum. I'm thinking, should you have closed 12 months? But that seemed like a long time to shut down a church. So 3 to 6 months sounds realistic. So that's good.
I had a church recently on our district that restarted, and I told them not to rush. They closed in November and relaunched in January. And that pastor will say, we should have stayed closed longer. Should have stayed closed to Easter. So, you kind of have to figure out what you can get in place. And there's all kinds of factors. I was dependent on the church for income at the time. So that meant we could only stay closed so long before we were going to have a problem as a family. And I tried looking for other jobs and God just didn't have that in the cards for us.
Yeah. That's good. So you talk about gaining and leveraging credibility, and that is so important because as a pastor, you would not have been able to close the church and relaunch had you not had that credibility. And you talk about some steps in here to kind of gaining tips for gaining and building credibility. I don't know if you remember them all, but maybe you can address some of them.
Yeah, sure. Do you happen to remember off the top of your head what page or have it there in front of you?
It's in the Kindle book, let's see, page 35. I don't know if that correlates directly with yours or not.
It'd be somewhere in there. But so we talk a lot about credibility because you're going to pay for everything you want to do, right? And credibility is built from a couple of different things. Trust. Stephen Covey, Speed of Trust, he talks about this. It's your character and your competency. Now, there are some of us who are more relational and we can build up credibility fast through our relationships. Others of us are lean more on the competency side. We get things done, make things happen, and that's how people trust us. But ultimately, it's got to be both. Otherwise, people don't trust us, right? So we have to have this relationship that people know our character, our integrity is sound, and people know that we want something for them, not from them. And then our character, our competency rather, is our ability to get things done, but also our ability to grow and figure things out in the future. So those come together to allow trust to grow. Now, the thing about credibility, whether you're a pastor or leader in your marriage or your family, you can lose credibility through your actions more than anything else. And what tends to happen is we lose credibility through our actions, and then we try to talk our way back into it. And you can't talk your way back into it. You can only act your way back into it. And that happens over time. But so I talked about a few things that were helpful for me, remembering people's names. So we built a strategy. We actually had a whole system for making sure we knew people's names the second time they came in. And then especially kids' names. Man, if you remember somebody's kid's name, they don't care if you remember their name, right? Like they just love it. As a leader, apologizing quickly and honestly, and then take a little more blame than you deserve and a little less credit than you think you deserve. And that always bodes well, because you probably deserve a little more blame than you think, and you probably deserve a little less credit than you think, right? Do the jobs no one else wants to do, and not ask anyone else to do something you won't. Now, a piece of that, kind of a caveat that happens as you grow that you have to learn. Like if you're doing everything nobody wants to do, you're doing everything and you're the cap, right? So there comes a point where you have to learn to share the ministry. And so you see something that needs doing, you go do it, but you take 30 seconds, say, God, who do I need to entrust this to next time that would love this and thrive? And you take that moment and then you follow up and actually ask them. But finding ways to operate in your strengths instead of constantly in your weaknesses, you'll be much more joyful, much more pleasant to be around. You'll get more wins. Look for small risks with disproportionate payoffs at first. These are the low-hanging fruit. Like if you are going into a church, a lot of times a paint job, cheap, quick, makes the whole thing feel and look better. It's a cheap, easy way to get a win. There's all kinds of look for those that you can do something small but get a bigger return on before later when you need to take a big risk to get a big return. And then just keep yourself getting better. Usually I would take one or two aspects at a time of the work I was doing and like, I'm going to work on this for the next thing. I'm going to work on my preaching. I'm going to work on my communication. I'm going to work on how I develop staff or build volunteer, whatever it is that's in your responsibility, that there's a piece that you're constantly getting better at so that you can continue to develop as someone useful to God and his kingdom and the church.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Tim, I appreciate it. I got one last question for you here. I know you're a busy guy and going to have to go, but you talk a little bit about vision. And let me just encourage you folks out there, if you're listening to this, buy his book. We in a 30-minute podcast, we can't go through the entire, it's a 200-page book, but it's an easy read, it's a quick read. The good stuff, actionable, is practical. It's not, nothing wrong with theology. I love theology. Nothing wrong with philosophy. I love philosophy. But there comes a point where we got to get out of our head and get into the community and begin putting some feet to those prayers. We can't ask God. We can't stay around the altar and keep asking God to bless us if we're not willing to be his hands and feet, right? And so that vision, you talk about, serves the church, and you've talked a lot about casting that vision. I love your definition of vision, that translation of big ideas and beliefs into a cohesive picture. That's a really good understanding of vision there. I think it all starts with that vision and that mission for the church. I mean, you can have all the credibility in the world, but if you don't have a good vision and a good mission, and then put that vision and mission to a plan, I think it's Maxwell that says a vision without a plan is a dream. And and there's lots of dreams out there, but if you don't put that to a plan, it's never going to become a reality. So talk to us a little bit about that. I know you talked about the hydrant, and that came to you in a meeting, but I'm sure there was prayer, all that involved in that. Talk about when you began that.
Yeah, it began right from the beginning. We actually took 10 weeks. So I saw in Acts where the 120 were locked up for 10 days in that time of prayer and fasting and preparation. And I couldn't take our congregation and lock us up for 10 days. But so 10 Sunday nights, right? 10.
We were locked up for 2 years. Why not 10 days? Right?
Yeah, that did happen, didn't it? He can do it. I can't do it.
There you go.
So we took Sunday nights and we prayed for three things. We prayed for unity. We prayed for purity, and we prayed for vision. And we prayed, God, unify us, God, purify us, or purify the church of us. Like I pray that out loud with the congregation.
Wow.
And give us your vision for what's ahead.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes vision is such this catch-all word, and it's this thing we're looking for, this elusive vision that will be our vision for the next however long, whatever idea we have around this vision. But it's just, what's next? God, what's next? What do you want me to do today? And give me the courage to do it and the people to help me. And I think it's as simple as that. You know, God, let me see. Give me a picture of what's next. And when I do that, show me the next picture. And so many times I think God, he reveals himself like in light, but with one of those dumb little keychain flashlights, right?
Oh, yeah.
That you point that out into the darkness, it goes away. You point at your feet, you see one step.
Right.
I would much prefer a spotlight that God laid out in the future and showed me the next 12, 18 months, much less 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But he tends to show me just one step.
Yeah.
And I don't get to see the next step until I take that one.
Right.
So sometimes we're praying for vision and he's already told us what to do.
Yeah.
It may just seem small. It may just seem like not that big a thing, but he can't show us the next thing until he can trust us to obey this thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when I talk about vision, I think this is all this is positive stuff, useful stuff. You know, we need clear vision. We need to know how to communicate it to the congregation, all of those things. But what people are looking for is just something to get behind that we can do together for the kingdom of God right now. What's next? Let's go after that. And he'll reveal more and more along the way as you do that. And that strategy, that's the next step, the plan. How do I do this? And think steps, not programs, right? Like, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? And we kind of had 3 steps a year we were after, one big project. And that was, well, if we accomplished those in a year, we were thrilled.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, steps, not programs. I like that. And there was a point in the church where programs were it. But as you said, God continually, he says, I'm making all things new, right? I mean, that is the God of creation. So anyway, thanks again, Tim. Again, the book is Rethinking Church, Rethinking Church, leading the struggling church through something, but
death to new life. Yeah,
through the way, rethinking the way forward. So anyway,
and it just came out in Spanish as well.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's fantastic. So that's good. So I guess the Wesleyan Publishing House translated that for you.
Yep.
Good. Fantastic. Thanks again, Tim. I understand why they wanted you as the South Coastal Wesleyan Superintendent now. That's good. Thanks
good
a lot,
to be
brother.
with you guys.
You have a good day. I want to remind everyone, too, that Revitalize to Plant, Reshaping the Established Church to Plant Churches is available on Amazon or anywhere, Whiffenstock, anywhere you want to buy books, Books A Million, or you can go to book.revitalizetoplant.com. And there you can get a discount on for $15. I think it lists for $19 on Amazon. But I'll even pay the shipping through the USPS, United States Postal Service. I'll pay the shipping if you want to purchase it directly from me. Again, that's $15. It doesn't matter either way. But revitalizetoplant.com. And you all, it's been great being here. I appreciate it. Like and subscribe, if you will. A lot of people listen to this. We get about 2,000 downloads per episode. We're in the top 17% of all podcasts, which is great. This is just a testimony to people wanting to hear the story of God, and all that is good. But I'd encourage you to subscribe and then share it with your friends, because the subscriber base is what will help us get these voices out there, right? I've told you this is not about me. It cost me money to produce this podcast. I paid over $1,000 last year just in podcast promotion, production, and the tools to edit. The hosting of the podcast is not free. All these things, I'd encourage you to please like and subscribe if you will. Thanks a lot. You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices. Share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles in ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly.